The Classic Comics Forum podcast presents issue number 16, Avengers, number 16 through 28, Cap's Kooky Quartet, part 2. Welcome back to the Classic Comics Forum podcast. As always, I'm your host, Scott Harris, and today I'll once again be joined by Hoosier X for the second part of our two-part look at the seminal run of Avengers number 16 through 28, better known among comic book fans as Cap's Kooky Quartet. Last episode, Hoosier X and I examined the genesis of Cap's Kooky Quartet, where Stan Lee boldly wrote all of his main characters out of the series and replaced them with supervillains. And we also looked at the first 4 issues of the run, number 16 through 19, leaving off on an epic cliffhanger where Captain America has seemingly jumped to his death rather than let the Avengers be defeated by the swordsman. So without further ado, we're going to pick up right where we left off with Avengers number 20. Hope you enjoy.
Things I really love about this whole scene is that despite all the fighting and the bickering, is that Captain America has complete and full faith that they're going to figure out how to save him. Now, I'm not sure if he has it specifically figured out, but he thinks they can do it and just doesn't even hardly hesitate, just throws himself off of the girder.
Yeah, it's a really cool moment where you see in action like his confidence in the other team members, even though they've been at each other's throats the whole time. And they come through, Hawkeye shoots his thing, and then
Quicksilver grabs the antenna and swirls it around and makes a little like a tornado thing that keeps Cap from falling as fast. And then Wanda hexes, which causes a whole bunch of rivets to fall out, so that one of the supporting girders falls over so Cap can grab it. And then Cap shoots his little suction cup arrow with the line on it, and Quicksilver swings down and throws Cap his shield. So now Cap has his shield.
It's interesting, we don't really see Quicksilver do many Flash type tricks with his super speed. Usually he just runs around and punches people.
Yeah.
And he's not particularly good at that either, as we're going to see in some of the later issues. But he comes through here, and they save Cap, and they're all like, okay, Swordsman, your ass is grass. And then all of a sudden, Swordsman just completely vanishes.
Yeah.
And it turns out he's been whisked away by the Mandarin.
That's another one of the reasons why I love this, and why I loved it back then, because I was usually buying Tales of Suspense with Iron Man, because I liked Iron Man so much, and the villain half the time is the Mandarin. And it was so great back then that Tales of Suspense number 80 would be almost meant for $1 back in the 70s. So I had almost all those Tales of Suspense issues with Iron Man in it. And then when I read this, and it was maybe a year later, and there's the Mandarin again. And that's another one of the reasons why I really love this. With that Don Heck and Wally Wood is inking now.
Yeah, and Wally Wood's inks are great. The cover of issue 20 is really cool. With Captain America falling off the building. I've always liked that cover quite a bit. So the Mandarin has swordsman, and Mandarin's like, okay, we're going to make you really cool. I'm going to give you this special sword now that has all these, you can shoot a bunch of different beams out of it, just like my rings. And I've got this hologram, basically, of Iron Man. I'm just going to send to the Avengers, and I'm going to convince them to let you rejoin them. And once you rejoin them, you're going to set a bomb and blow them all up. And so that's what they do. He sends this hologram, basically, of Iron Man, and is like, oh yeah, I sent the swordsman to you earlier, just to prove himself, but you attacked him, which is totally not what happened.
It was just a big misunderstanding.
Yeah, it's like, you weren't even there, Iron Man. What are you talking about?
But then Hawkeye's attacking him, going, oh yeah, who's Iron Man? And Captain America is still got a big grudge against Hawkeye, so that makes him want to just fight with Hawkeye about, how dare you talk about one of the original Avengers like that? If Iron Man says that Swordsman is okay, even though he just made me jump off a building, then you just need to shut up. And Swordsman is going to be an Avenger. Yeah,
I thought, what really came to mind for this is, many, many years later in Avengers, I think it happened during the fight with Count Nefaria in issue 165. The government liaison, Henry Peter Gyrich, shows up at Avengers Mansion, and they're right in the middle of a fight, and there's a hole in the wall. And he just walks in and accesses all of their files. And he's like, your security here sucks. And they put in all these new security measures at Avengers Mansion. They have to jump through all these hoops whenever they have a new member they have to be completely vetted by the government and all this stuff. I'm reading this issue and I'm thinking, so a random picture of Iron Man shows up.
Not a bad idea.
Like, well, if something that looks kind of like Iron Man just tells us to let a supervillain onto the team, I guess we have to do it.
Yeah, especially if Hawkeye's against it.
So everything goes according to plan, but then Mandarin changes the plan. They were supposed to wait until Iron Man returns to the team, and then they were going to blow everybody up. But Mandarin's like, you know what? Why wait? Let's just blow everybody up now.
If they blow them up, then that will bring Iron Man here.
Yeah, that's what Mandarin thinks. And Swordsman's like, this isn't what I signed up for, although in fact it's exactly what he signed up for.
And it's too bad that he will have to kill the Scarlet Witch because she is so beautiful and would make a great mate for me, but I must kill her. Yeah, that panel. I love her hair, by the way, in the original coloring. I like the way they do it, that kind of the blue-gray, because she's brunette in the original coloring.
Right.
And then apparently she was a redhead in the X-Men, and I guess at some point when Roy Thomas started writing, he said, well, isn't part of the reason she's the Scarlet Witch is because of her red hair? I'm not exactly sure when they went back to that, but one of the things I really do like about the Cap's Kooky Quartet is the Scarlet Witch having that black hair.
I found this to be a little unbelievable. This swordsman, now that I have spent some time with them, I realize that the Scarlet Witch is hot, so I'm not going to kill them all. Sort of. I feel like Englehart actually used this to good use much later when he brought Swordsman back as sort of a good guy with Mantis, because he does sort of have the same sort of relationship with Mantis where he's like, he falls for this hot girl and then all of a sudden he wants to be a good guy.
Right.
And yet, in the context of this story, just his thought balloons where he's like,
she's too beautiful to be harmed. That's the quote.
At the bottom of page 17 in the story, he says, I could take pride in a victory in battle, but this is different. Even an enemy deserves a fighting chance. The swordsman cannot stoop to assassination. But that's the entire plan.
Yeah.
That was the whole plan.
Yeah, that was the plan, buddy. I think that they're just getting really close to the end of the issue.
The Avengers actually don't really do anything in this story to defeat Swordsman. He shows up with the bomb. They get suckered into letting him onto the team, and then he grabs the bomb and runs out with it. And they're all just standing around looking at each other like, what just happened? And if it wasn't for the Swordsman, they would all be dead. This would have been the last issue of the series.
You see that a lot in the Silver Age Marvels, where the last 2 or 3 pages, just all of a sudden they resolve it really, really quickly. And I think this is a 2-part story, and this is like that time period where they're starting to have a lot more stories going on to 3 and 4 parts. They're not just wrapping them up just like that.
I have noticed that as well, especially with the earlier Silver Age stuff. The story will be clicking along, and then just like in the last 2 panels, all of a sudden everything will end, and Stan will just have a bunch of really dense word balloons trying to explain why the story suddenly ended.
And because of the Marvel method, I think a lot of that might be the artist a little bit, I'm going along drawing, and a lot of the time the artist is also plotting the story, and then here's the last 2 pages, and we have a few things to wrap up. Although I hadn't really noticed that as we were going through these issues of Avengers here.
No, I agree. I think for the most part, these stories are starting to breathe a little bit more than the earlier one. And speaking of breathing space, you wanted to talk about the Mandarin a little bit.
The Mandarin, when I was a kid, I was a really big Iron Man fan when I was a kid. Even though I stopped reading it. I mean, I started reading it when the Mandarin didn't appear for a long time. But I was getting the back issues, and Tales of Suspense, those Tales of Suspense issues were 10 years old or so, and I was buying a lot of them for $1 or $2. And so I was reading all these Silver Age Mandarin stories, and I really loved the Mandarin. The purple and the green, and the way that he's like this, this evil Asian warlord who I don't know, has a stronghold in some indiscriminate part of generic China, and thinking a little bit more about this story, about how how Marvel was expanding, the villains, the villains are expanding out from the stories where they're started. A lot of them are. They're not just a villain for one hero. And the Mandarin seems like a kind of a strange choice to make him just a sort of a generic Marvel villain. But they have him here in the Avengers. It's a plot against Iron Man, but the Iron Man's not even in this. It's a hologram, and he's now become a foe of all the Avengers. He's also become a kind of a foe of the Swordsman, because the Swordsman betrayed him, but that didn't really seem to bother the Mandarin too much in Avengers Annual #1, where the Swordsman returns as one of the people working for him. And I could also think of in the Hulk, not long after the Hulk got his own comic book, the Mandarin appeared in like two separate like storylines, because he was in, I think it's number 107 and number 108, and then he teams up with the Sandman in Hulk number 113. And as I was flipping through number 20 just now, I noticed that the Swordsman calls him Fu Manchu. It was like his derogatory nickname. And it reminds me that when the Mandarin teamed up with the Sandman in Hulk number 113, the Sandman calls him Fu Manchu, and then he calls him Charlie Chan, and then the Sandman seems kind of upset that he's exhausted his ethnic stereotype jokes to keep calling him that.
I think you make an interesting point here in terms of, I get the sense reading these issues that Stan is kind of trying out different villains to see who works in the Avengers. We do have characters that have appeared before in Avengers and sort of go on to become classic Avengers villains like Kang, which we'll see in a little bit. But we also get them fighting against villains from kind of other characters who don't really end up sticking around that much. Like, first we have the Mole Man. In these issues we get the Mandarin, and then later on we're going to see Doctor Doom and then Atuma. It felt to me like Stan is kind of trying to figure out who exactly works as an Avengers villain, and some of them do, and as we're going to see, some of them don't. I think the Mandarin feels to me like a strange fit for Avengers. I can see the potential for him as sort of a mastermind, pulling strings behind the scenes and stuff, but just as happy that he doesn't really appear again as an Avengers villain, because I don't feel like he's quite got the scale for that. I think he works better as an Iron Man villain. Okay, on to issue 21. So here we have the Enchantress coming back, and she's like, I don't need the rest of the Masters of Evil. I can just destroy the Avengers by myself. So she recruits a new stooge who she imbues with a bunch of superpowers using the machine that they created Wonder Man with in issue 9.
Yes, we go back to the South American complex where Baron Zemo had his laboratory. And Eric Jostin, the mercenary, is kind of wandering around, and he's afraid to leave the area because he'll be picked up because he's wanted by Interpol. He just really doesn't have anywhere to go. And all of a sudden, here's the Enchantress, saying, "Oh, this guy's a perfect pawn. He's pretty desperate. I can probably get him to do what I want."
I really liked the exchange at the bottom of all of page 6, where after he gets his powers, the Enchantress is like, "Let's give you a costume and a code name," and he's like, "That's really stupid, lady."
Yeah. She's not offended though.
Well, she's not, and yet she does play a little bit of a trick on him by making him wear one of the ugliest costumes of the Silver Age. I like the giant poofy sleeves and the shoulder pads, 9 shades of brown.
He's one of these kind of like generic late Silver Age villains who would just kind of show up. I think you can kind of Swordsman after his first appearance, and then before Steve Englert brings him back. I think these two are on several like different teams that are put together by people like Batroc, and they both work for the Red Skull in a Tales of Suspense story. Beautiful art by Gil Kane, although I'm having trouble remembering the plot to it.
Well, anytime you can see this glorious costume, it doesn't matter what the plot is. So the Enchantress actually has a pretty good scheme here. Her plan
that's in my notes. I specifically put this is actually a really, really good plan.
Yeah, she basically uses her magic to cause the Avengers to sort of hallucinate. They think they're seeing all these menaces around town, and in the process of defeating these imaginary menaces, they manage to trash half of New York City. There's some pretty cool sequences where they're chasing after these imaginary threats, and they blow up a train and they wreck a building. And
Wanda's hex power goes right through the imaginary weird-looking unicorn monster and destroys a fortunately abandoned and condemned tenement building.
That's probably the same building that the Hawkeye's safe crashed into a couple issues ago. That's why it was condemned, damage from a flying safe.
Yeah, and I think there's like the plot of discrediting the heroes. That gets used an awful lot. I think in this case, though, it works a lot better than it usually does, just because of who these this group of Avengers. These guys, most of these guys were villains, just 3 or 4 issues ago. So it's really easy to see, people, instead of going, the Fantastic Four have gone crazy. This has happened before. Doctor Doom is behind it. But this is, it's the Scarlet Witch and Hawkeye and Quicksilver. They were like evil mutants and spies, and wasn't Hawkeye running around with the Black Widow and she's a Russian spy? I don't think there's exactly dialogue like that, but it's there in the background. It certainly makes a lot more sense than when this plot gets used a lot of the rest of the time.
Yeah, you make a good point here about how this is sort of a team that doesn't have the city's love and respect. I mean, the Avengers haven't been around that long anyway, but all the characters that the general populace appreciates, they've all gone away except for Captain America. Captain
America has been in a mood lately. Anybody who's run into Captain America on the street is like, oh, geez, what's wrong with Cap?
Yeah, he's still probably upset that he was snubbed by Nick Fury after sending him that love letter. And he's just moping all around town. But you're right. Captain America in these issues is really edgy. Like, he's got a chip on his shoulder. He's kind of a dick. And he pretty quickly gets taken out. They stage this scene where they make it look like Power Man is the good guy, and Captain America seems to attack him for no reason. And Power Man decks him and takes him right out.
Yeah, this is Captain America as like a regular dude.
One thing that's I wanted to mention is as I'm reading this, like I'm seeing some parallels between this and the scenes in Steve Englehart's Captain America run where they introduce Moonstone and they set out on this PR campaign to discredit Captain America. I just talked about these issues with the Captain on an earlier podcast, so it's really fresh in my memory. At that time, we kind of talked about how Englehart was really, it seemed very modern, his use of the public relations stuff, and that's true, but a lot of the plot elements to that story are actually very similar to what Stan's doing here almost a full decade earlier. So a cool thing that happens here is, after Captain America gets defeated, there's like all these newspaper articles, and Hawkeye sort of gives him the usual ribbing. But right after that, we get this sequence where all 3 of the other members of the Avengers individually take it upon themselves to go track down Power Man and avenge Captain America's defeat.
I like the way that the Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch wait until after Hello Dolly.
Yeah, Hawkeye goes right there to fight Power Man, and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are like, it's really important. However, we've got these tickets to see Hello Dolly.
Wasn't Carol Channing fabulous, Pietro?
Carol Channing, fabulous. But it doesn't seem to occur to any of them to get help. Like, they all go individually without mentioning it to each other, which just kind of defeats the whole purpose of being in a team.
Yeah, and they make sure that Scarlet Witch goes last and doesn't really confront Power Man. That's because she just points her finger and wins at the end of every issue, as we've seen several times in the last few issues, and they didn't really want to mess with that. So the cops come up and say, "Hey, what are you doing around here, Scarlet Witch?"
Yeah, after Power Man defeats Hawkeye and then Quicksilver in single combat, Scarlet Witch has one of the most anticlimactic battles of all time, where she's just standing outside the building and the police arrest her for loitering.
But they're out on bail because of Tony Stark's deep pockets.
Yeah. So after that, the city is like, okay, this is the last straw. The Avengers are clearly a menace, and they've been acting outside the law the whole time, but we didn't care before this. But now that they're aggressively loitering, we're going to require that they disband the team, and that's where the issue ends with the team going, well, we got to disband.
They're bothering respectful citizens like this mercenary who's wanted from Interpol.
Yeah. Now, so we go to issue 22. I always like the cover of this issue. There's some really good covers in this era. I'm not generally a fan of covers with the gray backgrounds because we get a lot of those that really kill the look. But this cover for 22, I like the figures. I think Enchantress looks really cool.
Marvel Pop Art Productions.
Yes, a pop art production.
And it's still Wally Wood.
And once again, the Avengers are arguing with each other at the beginning of the issue about disbanding. And so they break up. That's it. Yeah, but not before several more pages of infighting for no apparent reason.
I love that splash page. Wanda, they got a close-up of Wanda, and she looks kind of like Elizabeth Taylor right there.
Yeah, she does. Basically, Captain America is like, this is all clearly a frame-up. We got to find out who's doing it. And the rest of the team is like, what difference does it make? We quit. And then we get a sequence where they try and find work. And
In
all
show
of them
business.
fail terribly. Yeah, in show business. And, of course, Quicksilver tries to get a job at a carnival, and he can't even get a job as a circus freak.
And Wanda, pretty faces are a dime a dozen in show business, sister. So why should I hire a guy with a hex power? But I can sing. And then he cuts her off. So can a canary. Goodbye. I think this is the last time that they've ever said anything about Wanda wanting to be on the stage.
I think so too. I completely blanked about that, and I sort of appreciate it in terms of just giving some character development to each of them. And like that little, like on the flip side, this thing with Quicksilver in the circus, as I mentioned before, is the only character trait that he develops through this entire run of comics. And whereas Wanda doesn't really need this because she gets more development, much more than her brother does. She's actually thinking and doing things as a person. So this sort of little hook that they can hang stuff on that, she wants to be an actress, they don't really need it with her. Whereas with Quicksilver, I don't think Stan really has any idea who this guy is or why he's interesting. And so he's like, he loves the circus, I guess.
I've always kind of liked Quicksilver, but like, thinking about like favorite Quicksilver appearances, it's more like I like the idea of the character than the actual character himself.
So I had a really strange introduction to Quicksilver. It was in West Coast Avengers Annual 1, which crossed over into Avengers Annual 15. And it's a storyline where Quicksilver turns into a supervillain and reforms the Zodiac to take out the Avengers. And so
I did not read that. I don't think I was reading. I may not have been reading comics by then.
It was just a strange introduction to the character. There was a lot of Avengers history that I learned through that storyline because it brought back all these old characters. But so I was just basically introduced to Quicksilver as a villain and didn't discover him as an Avenger until I started reading these back issues. He started off as a villain, so I guess that's not too big of a heel turn. And in this issue, he might as well be a villain because his love of the circus leads the Avengers into certain doom because they end up getting hired by the Circus of Crime, who I have to assume, in terms of public performances, had changed their name from Circus of Crime because it's kind of a dead giveaway.
Maybe they call it the Ringmaster's Circus. Yeah, there's a little note here where they're talking about since serving our prison sentences, and then there's a note about for crimes committed in Spider-Man 22.
Decide they're going to bring in the Avengers, and then they can use the Avengers as patsies in their latest scheme, but that lasts like literally one page. Because when the Ringmaster tries to hypnotize the team, Quicksilver just runs around him, so his magic hat can't, so he can't see the hat, and then he just knocks him on his ass.
Yeah, Quicksilver is immune to hypnotism just because he's fast, and that I don't know. That doesn't really bother me. That doesn't make any less sense than Green Lantern being vulnerable to wood or yellow or whatever.
No, and it just kind of points out how limited Ringmaster's power is because someone has to be standing directly in front of him looking at his hat in order for it to work. So Quicksilver's just like, what if I step behind you? Oops.
And then Wanda hexes the clown.
I love this quote from the clown. Wanda hexes him. He goes down. He says, "This is impossible. It can't be. I've been a top clown for years."
I know.
He's like, how can the Avengers possibly defeat me? I'm a really good clown. Anyway, the Avengers win, but then the cops show up, and they're like, here's the evil Avengers beating up on a bunch of really unfortunate clowns, so we got to stop them from ruining the circus. And the Avengers run off, and...
Yeah, and the ringmaster is leading the cops in and pointing, saying, I told you, the Avengers attacked us! They're trying to rob my circus!
We get a cool sequence here where everyone's sort of like debating. And what I really like is at the top of page 11, there's kids arguing about whether the Avengers are bad guys or not. And they're wearing the official Marvel merchandise T-shirts that were put out. I think it's 65.
Yeah.
And then we get sort of a rundown where people are like, why don't the original Avengers come and take care of this? And then they're like, well, Iron Man's doing something in issue 72, A Tales of Suspense, and Thor's busy in Thor 122, and Giant Man... says, your guess is as good as ours.
He doesn't even try.
Yeah, they're like,
Giant Man
sucks.
He doesn't have his own series anymore. He actually, the reasons that they changed the lineup don't even make any sense anymore for Giant Man and the Wasp because they don't have their own series.
Yeah, exactly. So then we get this fantastic ending to this story where Power Man and the Enchantress are standing around, and this huckster, like a PR guy, comes in, a press agent. He's like, "You guys have what it takes. You know, why don't we can merchandise you guys, and you guys can become the new Avengers." And they're like, "Hey, this is a great idea." But then he's like,
I like what Power Man calls him, Fatso.
And he's like, you know, the general populace doesn't know this, but I was actually behind the team, you know, being destroyed. And Power Man's like, "That's a bunch of garbage. We're the ones that took down the Avengers." Of course, then the PR agent just rips his fat suit off, and it's Captain America inside. I love the panel where he's ripping his shirt open, and he's got the Captain America costume, but he's still wearing the fat bald mask.
The balding head, the little side fringe on the top of his head, the little mustache, and he has that over his Captain America mask. That's great.
Yeah. So he spends a couple panels getting undressed, and then they have a fight. And
I like the way the Enchantress is real suspicious of this, almost through the whole thing.
And she gets really pissed off. And so basically what happens is Power Man takes on the Captain America because Captain America wants to prove himself, except for Power Man still kind of wipes the floor with Cap. And the rest of the Avengers then show up. They're like, "Ha-ha," because Cap had sent a signal to them. And they all answer the signal, and they have this big battle. And Power Man is basically like, Enchantress in the middle of the fight is like, "You had your chance to kill Captain America." Because at one point, I skipped a little bit. He had knocked out Captain America, but instead of killing him, he's just like, "Well, that takes care of that guy." The rest of the team shows up, and Captain America has time to recover, and now he's fighting the whole team. And Enchantress is just like, "You should have killed Captain America when you had the chance. You're a weenie. I hate you." And then she teleports away. When she does that, Power Man's like, "Well, crap, I was only fighting because the Enchantress is really hot. I give up." It's kind of like...
he has no real motive to keep fighting now.
Yeah,
the plot is done. He's facing the full force of the Avengers. He does not have the protection of the Enchantress, so even if he does defeat all four of them, he's still wanted by Interpol.
Yeah, so I felt like he actually had a lot of reasons to keep fighting here, but he doesn't. He's heartbroken over this woman who he just met and really didn't actually give him the time of day throughout the whole story. There's a couple places where he's trying to basically get in her pants, and she's just like, "Oh, you're silly."
Well, she's the Enchantress. She's a Norse goddess. She probably just gives off this aura that even there's women that are that beautiful that aren't goddesses can get that exact same response. What I love about the Enchantress in this, I mean, as many times as I've read some of these stories, I had never really noticed how they're kind of starting to set up the Enchantress as, sort of a major master villainess on her own. Because, usually, she was in the Masters of the Evil, and Baron Zemo was in charge, and she was partnering with the Executioner. And another thing I've noticed about the Enchantress is I think she may be unique, or almost unique, in Silver Age Marvel, for being just about the only female villain who didn't, become a superhero. Didn't change over to the other side and become like a good guy or a good gal.
After Power Man gives up, he's just like, "Well, I might as well go to prison for the rest of my life. What difference does it make?" The city is like, they get this recording that Captain America had been making under his fat suit of Power Man confessing, and they rush it over to the authorities, and the authorities are like, "Wow, we feel like assholes." Of course, the Avengers still did trash half the city, but it was all a trick, so we forgive them, and they decide to throw Avengers Day in honor of the team. Now, we're going to see Avengers Day is actually going to crop up a few more times over the years. They have another Avengers Day in issue 45, which is interrupted by the attack of the Super Adaptoid, and then Kurt Busiek brought back Avengers Day in his run in the 90s in Avengers number 10. One thing that struck me when I was reading this is Captain America here, when he's in his fat suit and he's talking to them, and he says, "Now that the Avengers disbanded, you guys can form your own team of Avengers and everyone will think you're superheroes." And when I read that, I was like, wait, is this where Kurt Busiek got the idea for Thunderbolts?
Right, Thunderbolts.
It's basically exactly that, where the Masters of Evil become the Avengers. Well, the Avengers are supposed to be dead, and so they form the Thunderbolts, which is the team that takes the Avengers' place, and nobody, the general populace, doesn't realize that they're all supervillains that have just changed the way their costumes look. It's just like a whole scam, and I really wonder if that's where Busiek got that idea. So now we get to issues 23 and 24, which I think are not only the best issues in this run, but some of the best issues of Avengers, period. Maybe the best Silver Age, let's say the best Silver Age Avengers story.
I like it a lot, too. I'm not sure it can quite compete with how much I like number 19 and number 20, because I read those when I was a kid and loved them so much. But being a little more objective, I think I would agree with you on that. Even though Wally Wood, it's not Wally Wood now.
Well, it's not, but issue 23 is inked by John Romita, and
they're really good, too.
Oh, man. In the this omnibus edition I'm looking at, where it's on this like shiny paper and it's all been cleaned up and stuff, it looks so much like his work, like Romita's work in the DC romance books of the mid '60s. Some of these panels, like at the bottom of page 3, where Captain America is just sort of gazing into the distance at twilight.
The blue coloring because it's night, but it gets this whole feeling of sadness.
Oh, it's right out of a romance book. That's like,
how long will I be tortured by my memories? Will I ever be able to forget?
So I had forgotten that at the end of issue 22, even though they've had their names cleared, Captain America decides to quit the team anyway. He's like, I'm done with this crap. I'm out of here. So the team at this point is Hawkeye, Quicksilver, and the Scarlet Witch, and no Captain America. The Kooky Quartet is just the Ridiculous Three? I don't know.
Ridiculous Trio.
I can't really come up with a name. So Cap decides he's desperate for money now that he doesn't have a job. He's not just like getting handouts from Tony Stark. So he goes up to upstate New York and finds a job at a boxing camp where he's a sparring partner for the Champ.
They only call him the Champ. They never give him a name or anything.
No. And while this is happening, Kang is like, this is it. This is my perfect opportunity. This will be, the easiest time to defeat the Avengers. Now,
he's going to be getting revenge on 3 people who've never done anything to him.
Right. And logically speaking, since he's in the future and he's a time traveler, like he could come, it's like, this is the moment I've been waiting for. Well, actually, this moment has existed for you as like a fixed point. You can, at any point in your career, you can go to that exact moment and fight these guys. So why didn't you go there the first time?
One of the things I liked about Englert's run, which, I didn't read those giant size Avengers as they came out, but I was getting them as back issues. But he kind of takes a look at the guy can travel through time. He can just attack the Avengers over and over again every 3 or 4 issues until with the plan that eventually he'll win doing that. It doesn't work out that way, but that's his plan.
Yeah, I love Kang. He's my favorite villain in comics, and I do like the Englehart books. I think Busiek actually has the best Kang stories for me, but Englehart definitely keyed in on this idea, how does this guy ever lose? And we see why he loses in the Busiek issues. That question that Englehart kind of poses, Busiek answers 25 years later. But I guess I'm getting a little off topic. Let's go back to this story, which is Kang's third storyline in Avengers. He had appeared in issue 8. He appeared in a really goofy story in issue 11 where he had a Spider-Man robot based inside of an Aztec pyramid.
Yeah.
So the less said about that one, the better. But here he basically sends the signal to the Avengers, and they open this door, and when they go through the door, they've walked through a time portal into his dimension.
He adds a floor. He adds an extra floor to the top of Avengers Mansion.
Yeah, yes. No one notices a new top floor.
And they don't notice. They're like, what is that? What is he? He lures them with something, some kind of noise, or what is that noise? And they run up, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, what the heck is this room? I've never seen this room before. Where did it come from?
They're like, is there an indoor pool here really now? Oops. Nope, it's the future. So they're in the future, and Kang's like, haha, and then he just clocks all of them in one page.
Cleans their clocks.
Now, it turns out he's doing this to impress Ravana, and Ravana is the daughter of a king in this kingdom where Kang has taken over the kingdom, and he's left them as puppets, and he's basically like, if you don't bend the knee to me, I've got my army outside your kingdom, I'm going to destroy you, but I really don't want to do that because I think Ravana is so beautiful. She's so amazing. I want her to love me. So I'm going to do everything I can to convince you in a peaceful manner to marry me. And if you don't, I'm going to kill everybody. I have mixed feelings about Ravana because she's like, we'll never give in, but that's not quite the way she puts it. What she says is, I would never share the throne with a commoner. So when she says that, I'm like, I don't know. Part of me is rooting for Kang at this point.
A horrible, awful tyrant, world-conquering, time-traveling tyrant with a dumb headpiece. I love the headpiece, but can you imagine like someone walking around like that? Even in the fashions of whichever century this is.
But if he also just had like a little crown, she'd be totally fine with it. It's not the fact that he's an evil, world-conquering warlord. Anyway, Ravana tells Kang to get bent. And meanwhile, in our timeline, Captain America hears that the Avengers have disappeared, so he rushes off to help. And the Avengers are all being
He breaks the champ's jaw, it kind of looks like.
In the future, the Avengers get free because Wanda uses her hex power to break the giant jars that they're being kept in.
Just about to bring that up. There's Wanda and her hex. And the other, Hawkeye and Quicksilver, can't make a dent in these weird little glass prisons that they're caught in. Wanda knocks it out, just pow. Of course, then she can't do anything for the next issue and a half.
So Kang is like, okay, they got out, but that's okay. I'm just going to kick their butts again. And he does. He captures Wanda and Hawkeye pretty quickly. Quicksilver escapes. But before he can get around to finding Quicksilver, Captain America shows up. He has figured out what's happened, and he basically challenges Kang to confront him. And Ravana overhears this and is like, well, if you don't, I know you're a coward. And so Kang's like, okay, you just said the magic words, lady. Watch this. And he beams Captain America to his time period to fight him, except Ravana smacks a switch and Captain America goes all higgledy-piggledy and somehow ends up landing like right in front of Quicksilver, which is really handy. And the two of them attack Kang, just the two of them, which is probably ill-advised. And Kang's like, look, this is all beside the point. All I'm really here for is Ravana, so let's all stop fighting. I've got a giant army that's going to destroy everything if Ravana doesn't marry me. And the Avengers pretty much are like, we'll keep fighting to the end. And Kang's like, all right, you sealed your own doom. And he orders his army to destroy the city and kill everybody. And that's where the issue ends. I thought it was a good setup issue. A lot of cool things happen, but it's really issue 24. That's the classic. One thing I wanted to mention is 23 has a great cover. 24, on the other hand, I've never liked these giant group shot covers with all these little figures. It's pretty cool because you got the Avengers in the middle and they're totally surrounded by Kang's guys, but it's just so visually all over the place for me that it just doesn't have the power of 23.
It really just almost completely doesn't work in contrast to Avengers number 23 because of how good Avengers 23 is. They've got, this gigantic Kang. I guess because of the lighting, he's all orange and yellow, and he's like menacing these little tiny characters of the Avengers.
One thing I wanted to mention in the omnibus here, there's an introduction from Stan Lee, and I think it's in the Masterworks as well, where he says that he viewed issue 23 as sort of a classic fairy tale story, where it's kind of like Robin Hood, where there's this evil sheriff guy who's trying to pressure the princess into marrying him against her will, and then this band of merry men, rogues, show up to save her and sort of challenge, the evil overlord. And I thought that was an interesting view on that. I mean, I guess Stan would know since he wrote it if he could remember it. But in issue 24, we get something that's a little bit different. Basically, what happens in issue 24 is Kang basically beams himself out of the courtyard back to lead his army and personally, and the Avengers lead this desperate last-ditch struggle to fight back and save the kingdom, and it's totally doomed because Kang's armies just cannot be stopped. They're so overwhelming.
We don't have Thor, Hulk, Iron Man, some of the really powerful people that came along later that as talented as they are, especially, Wanda's hex. It's too bad she just used it a few pages ago to break open that glass prison, because if she was at full power, I'm sure she could take out this army.
Yeah, she probably could, but she doesn't. There's a panel here where after the defenses are broken down, a bunch of Kang soldiers sneak into the palace, and they take out Hawkeye, they take out Captain America, and Wanda thinks, I'm not going to use my hex power. The longer I wait, the more potent it shall be later. So the Avengers are defeated again. Kang installs himself as king. However, there's a little insubordination in the ranks. Kang's
Because the rule has always been to kill like the whole ruling family, but he won't kill Ravana because he's in love with her.
right. So his second in command is like
Boltag.
and Boltag convinces the rest of his guys to back him, and they're all like, "Yep, you've got to kill her, or else we're gonna mutiny."
Their military uniforms are all based on Rock'em Sock'em robots, right?
I should mention Dick Ayers is back inking, and he does like a workman-like job, but compared to Wally Wood and John Romita, it's just really not quite the same. There are still some good panels, like the top of page 13. Kang is agonizing over what to do. Mm-hmm. There's a panel where the second panel where he really looks like he's agonizing. Like he's like, I don't know what to do. And so he finally is like, you know what? I love Ravana, and I'm not going to kill her. And so his men try to assassinate him, and he goes on the lam, and he basically recruits the Avengers to help him. He's like, okay, here's the new deal. I've lost control of my army. All of my men are against me. But if you help me, save Ravana, we can rescue the city, and I'll promise to let this kingdom sort of run itself, and I'll just leave. And so the Avengers are like, this is crazy, but on the other hand, our only other real option is just to be executed. So why not? Let's do it. I should mention that during all this, Quicksilver's gotten away, and he just sort of vanishes for the rest of the issue. Where's Quicksilver? Well, we're waiting for him to show back up. He's somewhere in the Resistance, like out among the commoners.
He's wounded and being nursed back to health by by some, I don't know, I guess they're like French peasants or something.
Yeah, so we get this really cool sequence where Kang and the Avengers sort of free the king and Ravana, and they gather up all the king's men that they can, and they arm them with weapons, and they run this insurrection against Kang's own men. And there's some cool stuff here where Boltag is trying to rule in Kang's place, and the other leaders, the other officers are like, wow, we have made a horrible mistake here. Boltag isn't nearly as cool as Kang, and Kang is going to kill us all because he's Kang, and this was really a stupid idea. But they're kind of, in for a penny, in for a pound here. And there's this giant battle where the king and Kang and the Avengers smash into the courtroom. All of Kang's former soldiers are there, and they have this giant battle. And needless to say, the Avengers and Kang end up winning. They go rushing into the throne room, and it turns out that they don't really have any more work to do because Quicksilver had gotten in there and captured everybody. So all's well that ends well, right? Well, not so much. Just as Kang is fulfilling his end of the bargain and teleporting the Avengers back to their own time, Boltag comes out of nowhere, grabs a weapon from a guard that's distracted, and tries to assassinate Kang, and Ravana jumps in the way and takes the laser in the face to save Kang. And so Ravana dies in Kang's arms. Kang's men turn and execute Boltag in a really violent panel.
Doesn't the Avengers get sent back seeing just enough of that to know that something happened, but not knowing that Ravana's killed, right?
Yes, exactly. They're just disappearing like in a Star Trek style transporter beam, and just as they're dematerializing, Captain America sees Boltag attacking, and he shouts out a warning, but then they disappear, and there's nothing they can do, and they don't know what happened. But we as the readers know that Ravana has died.
So does Ravana get mentioned? It's been a while since I read some of the other, the Kang stories, but does Ravana get mentioned, like later in the Silver Age?
Yeah, Ravana becomes very important in Kang's next big Avengers storyline, which isn't until issue 69 to 71.
The growing man and they fight the invaders, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. Kang is in a contest with the Grandmaster, and if Kang wins, he gets the power of life and death, so he can bring Ravana back to life. That's why he's playing.
Okay, I remember. I remember that now.
Yeah, he chooses the Avengers as his champions, but when the Avengers win and he's given the power of life or death, he decides to use his power to kill the Avengers instead of save Ravana. And
what a jerk.
Yep, unfortunately for him, what he didn't realize is that there was someone in the story that wasn't actually an Avenger, and that's the Black Knight. And so when he uses his power to cripple all the Avengers, it doesn't work on the Black Knight, and the Black Knight creams him with his magic sword. And
that's right. Yeah, I haven't
Kang
read that.
Loses his power. This power over life and death, and then he's left with nothing, and Ravana's still dead. He keeps Ravana in this in one of these glass tubes where she's perfectly preserved at the moment of her death so he can bring her back. And so she's like in the background as a prop for like the next 30 years. Ravonna ended up actually in the Walt Simonson era. It's incredibly complex and not at all clear what's happening, but essentially in one version of reality, she ends up marrying Immortus in Limbo, a version of her that never died from an alternate reality. But then another alternate reality version of her ends up killing Kang.
The council of Kangs?
Yeah, in that there's a female Kang who's calling herself Nebula, but it's not the character Nebula that's Thanos' granddaughter, who is also in like the same time period of Avengers. So there's two characters that look almost identical with the same name, but one of them is Thanos' granddaughter. The other is actually Ravonna, who killed her version of Kang in her timeline and became that timeline's Kang, but is actually Ravonna using his technology. And then she became Nebula and mind controlled all the Avengers. I could be getting this wrong because it really doesn't make any sense. So the less said about that, the better. But yeah, Ravonna becomes a very important character. I love this two-parter. I love Kang. I think this is great. And it's very important for his character development. He was very one-note in issues 8 and particularly in issue 11. He's just like random, time-traveling warlord guy. There's really nothing interesting about him. But in this storyline, he gets a lot of complexity in terms of his moral code as a warrior and as a man. It gives him a lot of complexity that a lot of later writers ignored, but some used to really good effect, particularly Kurt Busiek. After this, for me, it's a little bit downhill with the Kooky Quartet. 25 has a great cover. The composition is a little weird. They left so much empty space in the middle of it that Stan ends up just filling it with one of the biggest blurbs of the Silver Age. Just saying, enter Dr. Doom. But it's a really cool cover. The story doesn't actually live up to this at all.
No, it doesn't. I read it for the first time in, I think it was the Essential Avengers, whichever volume it was, and didn't like it at all. But when we were doing this, I read it again just to like last week, and I liked it quite a bit more. Maybe looking at it in color online, I liked it a little bit more. I mean, I wasn't like just completely sneering and hating it like the first time I read it. But it's still pretty stupid and has a lot of like things where you can kind of go, well, that doesn't really make any sense.
I'm just going to go over the plot really fast because there's no point in dwelling on it. But basically,
it's a Doombot. This is the first appearance of a Doombot.
Yeah, this is, I think Byrne would definitely retcon this into a Doombot because Dr. Doom has a cunning plan, which is to mail a letter to Quicksilver saying that he's Quicksilver's dad. And so Quicksilver's like, oh my God, Wanda, we have parents and relatives. They want to see us. And so the Avengers all just like, they don't like have a Quinjet or something at this point. So they just take probably a boat. I don't know. They mosey on over to Europe and they arrive.
They're in their civvies at the train station.
Yep. And they arrive in Latveria and then the police show up to arrest them. And they're like,
oh, it's funny. It's so funny. I was like, what?
This doesn't make any sense. But
this is why I can't be that mad at this story because I find it is hilarious. They're like, hey, Latveria, I've heard of that before. There's something. Oh, isn't this the country where Dr. Doom is the king?
Yep. Page 8. Captain America, they're in jail, and Cap goes, in all the excitement, none of us stopped to ask, who is the ruler of Latveria? I've just realized the answer. And someone who I assume is Hawkeye says off panel, suffering cats. You're right. This is Dr. Doom's pocket kingdom. Oh my God.
In their defense, I think that's kind of a recent thing. I think where Dr. Doom becomes the ruler of Latveria, the second Fantastic Four annual, because in his previous appearances, they don't say anything about Latveria. I don't think it's still hilarious. Don't they read the newspaper? It's like when that happens, it's like it should have been a big deal. It's like, hey, Dr. Doom, the biggest villain in the Marvel universe, he's become the leader of Latveria.
And since they didn't fly over there in a Quinjet, they went over as civilians and arrive on a train, like their travel agent. Hasn't the State Department issued any warnings about traveling to Latveria? I don't really understand how this works. It's just I couldn't believe. They're like, oh, hey, that's right. Oh, I've heard of Latveria before. So Doom. The whole reason Doom has brought them here is because he wants to defeat them so that the Fantastic Four will be scared of him.
This is what made me think of a Doombot because of how low and petty Doctor Doom seems here.
So the Avengers escape because once again Wanda waves her finger and gets them out of prison because she does that.
It's a little teeny hex and breaks a lock.
And they're like, let's just get out of here. Let's just get out of here. But they can't because Doctor Doom encases the entire country in a giant plastic dome.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, never mind. Let's go fight Doctor Doom. So they go to Doom's castle. They fight Doom, and he kind of kicks all their butts.
He's been reading the previous issues, and he knows that Wanda can kick his ass. So he's developed this, this special hex-free field or something like that.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I've got that in my notes here. She
points at him and nothing happens, and he calls her power childish.
This issue is particularly ridiculous when you're looking at these characters from a modern perspective. We have the Scarlet Witch, who literally reshaped all of reality just because of a subconscious whim. And here, Doctor Doom has basically a freeze ray that when he hits a button, it turns her powers off completely.
She should have hexed before he pushed the button.
I guess so. I guess this is like a Magic the Gathering timing issue, whether the counter spell goes off. So Doom is just on the verge of winning when Hawkeye shoots him with an arrow that has acid that starts disintegrating part of his armor. And Dr. Doom just flips out and runs away. He's like, I've got to change my armor. Next time I'm going to coat it so people can't just disintegrate it with a trick arrow.
Oh, and don't forget the part where the Fantastic Four do decide to go save them, but the State Department, they don't want an international incident.
They should have thought of that before they let the Avengers just wander into Latveria.
They didn't go as the Avengers. They used their civilian identities. I don't know. And the Fantastic Four can't do that because they don't have secret identities.
So the Avengers get a second crack at him, and it goes a little bit better. And they manage to escape.
Is there really that much left of the story?
It's just another second fight scene. And they get away because Hawkeye uses a sneeze smog arrow, which causes a cloud of sneeze gas, which gets inside Doctor Doom's armor, and he's overcome by a fit of sneezing for such a length of time that the Avengers are able to escape the entire country.
It's a little country.
It's a big sneeze, is the way I would.
They ran out. The train wasn't leaving for a while, so they got on the Latvian express bus that connects to Liechtenstein.
This issue's so bad. There's also a subplot that I didn't mention where there's a crippled kid who wants to go to America to get surgery so he can walk again, and Doom will go, and all the peasants that are worshiping Doom immediately turn on him, and then none of that's ever mentioned again.
I think this is the first Doombot. I don't know who made it, because I would think that if Dr. Doom is so great, he wouldn't create all these Doombots that do so many stupid things.
It's one of the worst Dr. Doom stories probably ever. It's so bad.
Oh, I don't know about that. When he was appearing outside of the Fantastic Four, they're almost universally bad.
So after this issue, we get a three-parter, loosely defined three-part storyline.
The return of Giant Man and the Wasp.
Yeah. So in issue 26, we get the return of the Wasp. Of course, we have the Avengers fighting amongst themselves, as always, at the beginning, but then we cut away to Hank and Jan are on a boat and
a scientific cruise. And I'm reading through the Submariner stories in Tales to Astonish, and I just by coincidence I just read that one a few weeks ago. Where that they mention it, I think, in Avengers 26 that if you saw Tales to Astonish number 77, and for some reason Hank can't turn into Giant Man. I think they go into that in the Avengers in an issue or two later.
Yeah, it's one of these things where he's put so much strain on his body that it's too dangerous. So he's like, we need to get help because the Submariner is going to attack New York.
The Wasp volunteers to fly to the mainland because the ship is disabled. No, the radio is disabled. They can't warn anybody. So the Wasp goes, well, I've still got my Wasp powers. I can fly. But she doesn't really have a costume with her because, they decided to forget they were superheroes for a while and they left their costumes at home on purpose or whatever. So she kind of lets her bathing suit pass as her suit, as her costume. And because it's too far to fly, because she's only about an inch tall, she rests every once in a while in her bathing suit. like just she turns full size, she lays in the water, she treads water, and she does that every once in a while, flying to the mainland, because they're going out of their way to make this make sense, right? Because how could she fly all the way to the mainland? And Atuma gets her, right?
Yeah, the bathing suit becomes a plot point because Wasp is like, he's not going to recognize me because I'm wearing a bathing suit.
Yeah, Giant Man and the Wasp had met Atuma in, when they still had their series and weren't just guest starring in the Submariner. They had fought Atuma.
So Atuma's on his way to destroy the surface world, as he always is, and the Wasp manages to get free from him and long enough to use the radio on his ship to radio the Avengers for help. And they're like, okay. At this point, they've given all the members of the team like these signal watches, like Jimmy Olsen. And there's a great sequence
this is what they're fighting about for a lot of this, is because it's the message machine that Tony Stark has developed, and you have to have a code to activate the message. And Captain America is doing what he does all the time. This time is being like a kind of an authoritarian jerk about it, and listen, you've got to pay really close attention. And Hawkeye, who is ready to take offense at anything anybody says, just starts, he's being a jerk too and being a whole big jerk about it. And this is also a plot point because he's not there when the Wasp's message comes in.
Right, and he can't answer his Avenger signal because he is enjoying the adulation of the lovely showgirls in an East Side nightclub. And one of them wants to see his Hawkeye ring and drops it, and it breaks or something because the Avengers are trying to signal him, and Captain America's finally like, well, screw him. We don't need him anyway. Let's just go without him.
God, it's so dumb.
It's very dumb. So the rest of the team shows up. They find Atuma, and they fight Atuma, and we have one of these things where Atuma defeats them all, and one of his guards is like, yeah, that's great, except they can't breathe water, so you're kind of cheating. So Atuma's like, you know what? Let's revive them so I can beat them all again to prove it. And so they start fighting again, and the Avengers during the fight accidentally crack open this side of their submarine, and it fills with water. And this time, all the people watching are like, well, they're all going to drown because they can't swim or breathe the water. This didn't make sense to me, how they're like, you've got to prove yourself in combat against these guys because they're not used to being underwater. And then when the ship fills with water and they're all going under, and Atuma's trashing them underwater because they can't really swim that well, and they can't fight swimming. All of the same people that just said that are like, well, this is totally fair. This is fair.
Wanda did it to herself.
So at the end of the issue, Hawkeye gets back and he's like, wait a minute, I know I can use the message machine that Cap was badgering me about, only he doesn't know how to turn it on because
he can't remember the code, the 4-digit code.
So then he remembers there's a different machine that Tony Stark had built that will allow him to remember the code. So he straps himself into it, and while he's there, a mysterious figure appears. Cliffhanger.
Right. And in this case, it is not someone you would guess in a million guesses.
No, because it's the Beetle.
Yeah, the Beetle.
And so the Beetle is just attacking Hawkeye and trying to cream him. Hawkeye.
But now you're into the next. You're into the next issue in number 27.
In issue 27. What I like about this sequence is Hawkeye's actually not even paying attention to the fight he's currently in, because the Beetle's trying to trash him, and he's fighting Beetle, but all he's doing is maneuvering himself over to the view screen so he can punch in the code, so he can get the message from last issue. And then once he gets it, he just leaves.
Well, come on, it's the Beetle.
That's got to be so embarrassing for the Beetle. The Beetle's like, I'm going to kill you. And Hawkeye's like, hold on, I got a text message I got to take here. Sure, hold on. Oh, gotta go. So Hawkeye flies out there, and Atuma defeats the Avengers, but Quicksilver gets himself in a torpedo tube and gets fired out into the ocean. Hawkeye rescues him, and they go sailing in. Atuma's about to destroy the world, basically, and Captain America is like...
He has that tidal machine.
Yeah.
It's gonna magically have enough water to create really huge tides, and so that the humans will only be able to live in the mountainous plateaus and things, and they're gonna the Atuma and his barbarians are gonna take over all the lowland areas because they'll be underwater.
There's the thing here I like where Stan basically uses the old trope of the supervillain telling what his plan is, where Captain America, Atuma's about to destroy the world with this thing, and Captain America's like, things look pretty hopeless. This is a thought balloon. He's got one weak chink in his armor. This is the time for me to play upon his colossal vanity. And so he starts talking to Scarlet Witch. He's like, this is a bunch of crap. He doesn't really have this machine. He can't do anything. And Attuma gets so pissed off at Cap that he spends like the next 2 pages talking about how great he is. And while he's doing that, Hawkeye and Quicksilver show up and attack. And basically Wanda uses her hex to free them, because she's their get out of jail free card. And Hawkeye and Quicksilver fight their way onto the ship, and they're surrounded by like 100 guys, and they're about to die in this very sort of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid sequence when Captain America and the Scarlet Witch show up, and there's a big fight, and the wave machine is destroyed. The end. Except when the Avengers run back to Avengers Mansion, they find there's another new message waiting for them, and it concerns the Wasp.
The Wasp. That's right. She's kidnapped or something.
Yeah. One thing, like, basically the reader is challenged to figure out, why wasn't the Wasp still on Atuma's ship? And that's a really good question, because when you start to read the next issue, the explanation doesn't really make any sense.
Okay. But before we go, let's just talk about Attuma for a second. Attuma sort of pops up. He's in he's in this Avengers, and he's in the that Tales to Astonish fighting Giant Man and the Wasp. I think his first appearance was that Fantastic Four number 33, where they're just given a real vague idea of the geography of Atlantis, and there's also these barbarians, and Attuma is like the leader of the barbarians, and it's actually a really good idea, to have the vast oceans, the vast kind of cultures that would live under the oceans, but they didn't really use it very well for quite a while. That's one of the things I really like about reading the Tales to Astonish, the Submariner series, which I'm reading a lot of those for the first time, is to see how they use Attuma in Submariner series, where they're not really trying to come up with a way for him to be challenging to the Avengers or Giant Man. They're having them in his element in the water, and I'm hoping that they turn out to be a lot better.
I'm not a fan of Attuma, but to be fair, I'm not a fan of really any underwater characters, either heroes or villains. I just find the whole setting to be boring. So Attuma for me, I can't say I've ever read an Attuma story that I particularly like. There's a pretty good one.
I think when I first started reading comics, I read the first few issues of Supervillain Team Up, and I think he's used really good there. Yeah,
I was about to say the only one I can think of that I liked was the crossover Avengers 154, 155, and Supervillain Team Up 9 with Attuma and Doctor Doom. That's a good storyline, but for the most part, I'm just not really a fan. So back to issue 28, Hank Pym contacts the Avengers. He's like, "Hey, I'm Hank Pym. I used to be Giant Man." They're like, "Great, it's Giant Man's secret identity. Who cares? Nobody cares."
It's a bit where Hawkeye is going, this could just be some dude. That Hawkeye can't just say like, "Oh wow, Giant Man." He's all like, he has to start arguing about it.
Yeah, but he's got a good point, especially after a hologram of Iron Man convinced them to let Swordsman join the team.
Yeah.
I think just a voice on the radio telling them that it's Giant Man, it probably shouldn't fly at this point.
But Hawkeye is of course, kind of rude about it.
Well, of course he is. Hawkeye's actually kind of rude about everything in this issue because he rightly thinks, wait, if Giant Man's back, I'm just going to be a second fiddle because Giant Man's way more powerful. And he's kind of correct, because what happens in this issue is it turns out the Wasp isn't captured by the Collector, who's a new supervillain. The Collector challenges the rest of the Avengers to fight him because he wants to capture them and add them to his collection. And there's a whole giant, no pun intended, sequence where Hank proves he's Giant Man by becoming a giant, and then there's just page after page of Giant Man fighting the Collector.
The Beetle is like one part of the collection
yes.
now. The Collector's collection, and he's got some kind of he's hypnotized or whatever and must do what the Collector tells him to do.
Yeah.
And that's why he was in Avengers Mansion in number 27.
Yeah, Stan plays a little fast and loose with things here, so it explains why the Beetle is in 27. When we get to Jan, who's been captured by the Collector, she's like, last thing I remember, I had gotten to Avengers Mansion and radioed Hank that I was coming back. We didn't see any of that in 27. Last we knew, she was being held captive by Attuma. Somehow she got free from the submarine, got to the surface, flew all the way to New York City, and got captured by the Beetle all off screen.
I think that The Avengers must have been like startlingly difficult to write and keep track of things, because they've got a few issues here, maybe the next 20 issues or so, where they have weird little things like that, like the famous bit where the bad guys disintegrate Captain America's shield. It appears 3 or 4 pages later with absolutely no explanation, and there's never any discussion about that incident.
There was a lot of little weird things. I had mentioned earlier, the Collector in this issue is a complete non-entity, and basically all he does is he's got like these giants in his collection. He's got like different weirdos in his collection that he has attack the Avengers. It felt very, very similar to me to the way that Immortus worked in issue 10, where he would just summon like the biblical Goliath to fight for him, and like the biblical Hercules, and he was just summoning Merlin. He was just like had all these people that would fight for him. I kind of wondered reading this why they didn't just use Immortus in this story, especially since they had teased in issue 16 that he was going to be coming back to fight the Avengers.
Yeah, you're right. This could very easily be an Immortus story. Just with a few little minor changes. I don't see why Immortus couldn't put the Beetle under his thrall. Immortus isn't even a very well developed character of any kind. Yeah, that comes much later.
Yeah, another weird thing in this issue that I didn't buy at all is when Hank turns into Goliath, he is like, oh, I'm going to prove to you that I'm who I say I am by turning giant. And Wanda goes, wait, hold on, I've been making a costume for you in case you came back to the team. It's like, wait a minute, just because Wanda is female, she spends all her time sewing random costumes for people that aren't even on the squad? I mean, I know that they were doing it because they wanted an excuse for why he had a new costume in this issue, even though he was retired at this point, but I would much rather have had Quicksilver be the person who made the costume. Like, he has no other character traits, and maybe he's a seamstress in his spare time. Maybe that's he's really into making costume design, because it just didn't, to me, it did not fit in with anything we've seen from Wanda before or since. And then when he puts on the costume, he turns into it, and Captain America's like, oh, you're a real Goliath. And
hey, that's a much better name than Giant Man.
Yeah, he's like, a Giant Man was a stupid name. I'm going to call myself Goliath from now on. Okay, sure. And then, so anyway, they defeat the Collector and they free Jan, but when Hank tries to shrink back down to size, he gets stuck at 10 feet and passes out because he warned everyone that he wasn't supposed to be doing this, and they wouldn't believe him. And that's the big cliffhanger for next issue.
Okay, yeah, because when I was reading that, for our discussion, I thought about going on. I thought about going on and reading because, they have these little cliffhangers. But then I was remembering, man, this is not such a great time for the Avengers.
No, this is a good place to stop. I think the next issue, the Sons of the Serpent, is a good storyline. But for me, after the Kooky Quartet, we hit a pretty big down patch for me until around issue, say, 41. In terms of a conversation about Goliath, one of the reasons, this may be apocryphal, but supposedly one of the reasons that Stan brought him back is he thought that having a giant on the cover would sell comics. And you see, he's on the cover of issue 28, and Goliath is featured prominently on every cover of Avengers from issue 28 until Hercules shows up in issues 38 and 39. And then we get Hercules instead of Goliath on like every cover for the next several issues in a row.
I love that Goliath costume. That one that Wanda had like designed and sewed and created, because she's a girl and girls do things like that. You got to give her credit. That is a really nice looking costume.
Yeah, I think this is his best costume. I think this is his best one. I liked it. They went back to this many years later during the Busiek run. He went back to this costume. I think it was a good choice. But at the end of this issue, Hank and Jan are back on the team, and so the Cap's Kooky Quartet era officially comes to an end at the end of issue 28 when Goliath and Wasp rejoin the team officially. So these issues, it was just over a year, 13 issues total from 16 to 28, and it did a lot of interesting things. I think the main legacy of these issues is introducing particularly Hawkeye and the Scarlet Witch, but also Quicksilver to the Avengers. These are 3 characters who are very important to the team, and Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch are, when you think of Avengers, those are 2 of the characters you think of first. So looking back on it now, what do you think the legacy is for Cap's Kooky Quartet? I know you had mentioned that Marvel recently did like a throwback series set during Cap's Kooky Quartet, and you felt like it really didn't do justice to those stories.
So I guess like what I'm saying is that they do have the period does have a really strong legacy, looking at the next, I don't know, I guess 15 or 20 years. But today, because I don't actually read the Avengers except for those issues that they did of looking back at Cap's Kooky Quartet, I'm not sure there really is much of a legacy for that anymore.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because, as you mentioned, for the 15, 20 years that followed, the series was really given a lot of prominence within Avengers. The characters would reference that period a lot, and as a fan, you sort of knew what the Cap's Kooky Quartet was, even if you had never read the stories, because it was such a famous moment in the series history. But of course, I feel like a lot of Avengers history has sort of been lost or intentionally destroyed over the last 10, 12 years by Marvel. So it's sad, but it's not really a surprise. That's it for this episode of the Classic Comics Forum podcast. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Hoosier X. I hope you enjoyed our look at the Cap's Kooky Quartet era of Avengers. Next time, I'll be joined by forum member Outrageous to discuss a storyline that had a lot of personal meaning for her, Wonder Woman, Space Pirate. So, I hope you'll join us next time, and as always, you can visit us online at classiccomics.org to join in the conversation.